And that brings us to our opening keynote on battling the Great Resignation. A term I'm told was originally coined by a Texas University professor to describe what could only be given as the tidal wave of people in the US who were quitting their jobs due to the pandemic, as workers began to rethink where, how, and even why they work. And of course, if anyone here can substantiate that claim, then please do. But even as the risk from COVID appears to be diminishing, the Great Resignation trend is only worsening. A record 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs in the latter months of 2021 as the employment market made a seismic shift from a world where employees typically sell themselves to a company to one where a company now has to sell itself to a candidate. Joining us now to discuss more on how manufacturers are dealing with this and in some cases even compensating for it is Craig Haydamack, who is CHRO at Milliken. Let's bring you up onto the stage if we can. Hello, Craig. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, and welcome to. Pleased to be here with everybody.
It's fantastic. It's a privilege to have you here from us. And like you said good afternoon. Where are you based? Where are you joining in from?
I'm actually at a plant in Manchester, UK today.
Fantastic. It looks relatively sunny from where you are as well, we can see.
It is. Fantastic. It is nice. It's a nice UK day here today.
Now, I understand that you have a presentation that you'll be bringing up very shortly. But first, why don't you just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about what you do at Milliken.
Sure. Well, happy to be here. So I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Milliken. We're about an 8,000-person chemical and textile company based in southeastern United States. And myself and my team are responsible for our entire workforce at the company, from hiring, engagement, recruiting, retention, development, on all of those different areas. And we're probably, like all of you, facing the challenges of getting enough talent into the business right now to fill all of our seats. And so I thought today we'd just share a little bit of some stories of some of the things that we're trying to do to be more competitive in this environment. And we're hopeful that we'll give you some ideas and spark some new thoughts for you as you try to tackle this challenge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all affected by it, so looking forward to it. We'll get those slides brought up momentarily. And a quick reminder to anyone in the audience while you're listening to Craig, of course, any questions you may have, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat. As I said earlier, our producers are on hand to help field those. I'll be back with some questions, and hopefully yours too, when we see you back here in about, shortly. I'll leave you to it, Craig.
All right. Thank you so much.
Enjoy.
Well, I'll go ahead here and kind of walk through the slides. And if you can go ahead and help me page down there, your page to the next slide would be great. All right, very good. So just a little bit of quick background here on Milliken. Go backwards and get this correct here. Milliken, we are actually a 157-year-old manufacturing company. We're founded in Maine. We're still family-owned, the fourth generation of the company. And we are basically focusing on advanced textiles and chemical additive products, and also a range of floor covering products and medical bandages as well. Our core competencies are all around textile manufacturing, and then applying sort of advanced properties to building something like an airbag or fire-resistant military uniforms or things like that. And so we've been working hard to develop the workforce and the organizational health of our company for a number of years. We think that's one of the core things that sets us apart and helps us succeed in this increasingly difficult market. A little bit more background around the company. We have approximately 11,000 textile and chemical products that are in dozens of different products you're using probably every day in your apparel, automotive, in a medical setting, in building materials, military usage, packaging, etc. As I mentioned, we're headquartered in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and we're actually have a presence in 14 countries. So with that, going a little bit into the challenge we're facing, this is pretty much the theme of the presentation, the discussion, and I know what many of us are feeling is a challenge around labor supply, whether the difficulty of hiring and filling positions, and then also the potential increase in turnover. As so many jobs are open, many people are using this as an opportunity to make a career change or upgrade or find a path. There's been a lot of research done coming out of the pandemic that many people are using this period to sort of reflect on themselves, their careers, their life, and what they like to do and where they want to be, and are making a lot of challenges. So it's not just a hiring challenge. Frankly, we're facing as much a retention challenge as anything. So with that in mind, just a little bit of data kind of about the environment that I think probably all of us are familiar with. This is for the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. In the last month or so, highest number of manufacturing job openings we've had in 22 years since they really started publishing this report. The unemployment rate in the U.S. is one of the historical low points. So if you kind of look back since the 1940s when they started really tracking this, in the early 50s, unemployment reached 2.5%. Then again, 1969, it dipped to 3.4%. And then it dipped down to 3.5% right before the pandemic, right at the beginning of that. And now we're at 3.6%. So, as folks are changing jobs, there's also just that contracting availability of workforce overall. There's estimates of obviously more than a million Americans impacted by the pandemic. You had much higher early retirement rates because of the pandemic. A lot of parents have left, especially working mothers have left the workforce for childcare issues and other disruptions there. And this is also continuing a long-term trend. For the last 20 years, the labor participation rate in the U.S. has been dropping. So the pandemic just really has accelerated what was a slow pattern and change has just accelerated greatly. So I think we're all familiar with these and some of the challenges that we're facing. That's then translating into wage inflation. And so the Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes, for many jobs, industries, and locations, what the inflation rate is quarter by quarter. If you put together the last four quarterly reports from them for production labor jobs in the U.S., the overall inflation rate is about 5.7% in terms of wage inflation. As you can see here, it's actually gone up here in the most recent report in March. And so there's no end in sight. My understanding from different readings is that as you get sort of price inflation in a country like we're seeing today, that wage inflation happens, but it tends to lag behind. So if we hear some potential news stories that inflation might be starting to level off, we may still see the wage inflation continue for some time in the future until it gets to a more normal stage. So I know we're all facing that challenge as well. And I'll share an example with you here shortly of something we're trying to do to at least understand the patterns better. So when I talk to, as I'm doing here today with our team in the UK, talking with our plant managers and manufacturing leaders and our HR managers that support all of our plants, the basic message is that the world has changed. We're going to need to be able to compete in a different way in a perpetual labor shortage. That this is not going to be, I think for many of us, we thought as the pandemic ends that the labor market will bounce back and we'll kind of go back to normal. And that's obviously not going to happen. And so we're really working to how do we sort of turn the ship of how we think about production labor and recruiting and retention and hiring and making a pretty significant shift in how we approach this as a company. And one of the things that as we started to have this discussion that I heard loudly initially was, well, it's only about wages. We just need to adjust wages and everything else will take care of itself. And that's really not true. Obviously, wages are critical, but there's a lot of other factors in this that are equally important to the overall recruiting and retention equation. And so as we talk to our manufacturing teams, we talk about this being really 50% recruiting and wages and 50% retention. We have to think about both sides of the equation if we're going to succeed in this competitive labor market. So that's sort of the big picture discussion that we're having. And I'll show you a couple of examples of how we're thinking about this. One of the other discussions we're having is, if we go back sort of in our company, in our region, if you go back 3 or 4 years, there was a much greater availability of labor. And, you put out a job requisition and you'd get 5, 10 candidates, or you'd call the temp agency and they'd send a list of people over within a few days. And it was relatively straightforward. And it wasn't something that was the top of our worry list. And now that, we're in the opposite situation. And as we talk with our manufacturing leaders and our HR folks at our different plants, we talk to them that we need to think about competing for talent is sort of the same ways that our business managers compete for business in the different product lines that they're running. And you think about the types of factors that a business manager thinks about. They worry about pricing and margins. And for us, in the labor market competition, it's how do our wages compare and our benefits to the local market? Where are we at versus that positioning? A business manager thinks about marketing, and we have to do the same about what is our employee value proposition and your brand and your advertising. What are you sharing? I think about some advertisements seen lately on the TV for a number of some large, well-known companies, and many of them are leading with. They're not even talking about the company. They're leading with, day one benefits, expanded parental leave, things like that, and they're out advertising themselves from employee value proposition, just like they'd be marketing their products. And so, as from an HR manufacturing community, how do we think about marketing and branding and advertising our employment opportunities? We also need to be thinking about customer satisfaction, like a business does. And in our case, what we're looking at is something called the Employee Net Promoter Score, and also looking at our organizational health scores to see how are we doing, how are we improving, and are we building an organizational health environment where people want to stay and maintain over time. And sourcing, just like a business has to source raw materials and have multiple sources of materials to use, a manufacturing site now needs to have multiple incoming sources of talent. And I think in our case, we historically relied on temp agencies. We're now adding more direct hiring, more school recruiting, and we're also have our first second chance hiring engagement, which I'll talk more about, which is hiring folks that are transitioning out of incarceration back into the workforce. We've got to be quick on our operations. Our hiring operations and onboarding have to be effective, but they have to be lean and fast. Candidates have so many job opportunities right now that if you aren't quick and move when you have an opportunity, you're going to lose them probably within 24 hours. And we have to think about innovation as well. We can't just do the traditional hiring processes we've always used. We have to look at new talent sources, looking at how we design our shifts to make them more employee friendly. How do we just provide transportation, things like that. But effectively, the message that kind of leadership message to our team is we have to compete like a business competes to succeed in this space. And that's part of HR's responsibility to enable the manufacturing environment and their success. So with that as a little bit of a backdrop, I'll share a little bit of information about some examples of some things we're doing. Some of these things are very traditional, and some are a little bit of the newer ways of looking at things. So in terms of improving our recruiting competitiveness, we're making a push to really streamline our processes and policies. We're able to find a candidate that's interested in Milliken. They need to actually start on their shift within, 24 to 48 hours. And so what we found is that if we aren't being able to sign somebody up and know they're going to start within a day, we're probably going to lose them. The other piece that we're looking at is starting them on the shift. One of the things, sort of old practice that we had, was we would bring people in on first shift to train them, and then put them on to second or third shift where they're going to have their regular employment. But that moving shifts in the short term during the training period actually creates an inconvenience and a potential childcare issues and things like that for the associates. So how are we figuring out how to start them on the shift they're going to be on and train them on their shift versus putting them through that inconvenience, because that may be enough to push them out to another employer. We're also looking at simple things like giving service time credit. So if you move over from another employer to us, we'll give you that time for vacation. We're also looking at how do we give more flexibility for personal needs, for medical appointments, and also trying to adapt to shift preferences as well to help support people in their work-life needs. We've also added something which we've never had before, full-time dedicated production recruiters that just specialize in certain areas. And we actually have, in our case, assigned them to certain sort of geographic regions. So each of them will own 3 or 4 or 5 plants, and they work with the plants on what their needs are, the shift schedules, the skills, things like that. And then they also work and manage, all the social media events, the job fairs, the school engagements, anything at all, any potential source of talent, community colleges, et cetera, that those recruiters sort of own that region and work that region in support of the manufacturing plants. And there's an expectation that they meet at least weekly in person with each manufacturing site to clarify their needs, their forecasts, skill requirements, et cetera. Really having an HR person and HR recruiter that's very dedicated to enabling the workforce of those plants. As I mentioned, we're exploring second chance hiring engagements. So this is really for folks that are transitioning out of jail or out of prison. They're often going through sort of an intermediate phase where they're getting some support as they transition back into their regular, life and hopefully a new career. And there's some best practices out there about how you really a company can work with agencies to help people make that transition, and you can really build some strong, engaged, passionate, and new employees that have a very, very low rate of reoccurrence of any issues if it's done right. And so we've done one very successful pilot in that, and we're looking to expand that. We're also looking at one of the things that we're hearing right now with inflation, especially gas prices, is the commuting distance to a location can be a real barrier. Some of our locations are in a little bit more rural areas. So working with a rental car company where effectively we rent vans and we're designing our own van pools where some of our associates are sort of certified to be drivers. And they're actually helping to drive the routes, bring their coworkers to work and return them home. The company is paying for the van and the gas, and the driver gets a little bit of an extra pay bump as well for this service. And it's helping to bridge that gap and helping bring people in where they may be, the gas prices may go into a place where they just can't afford to commute 15 miles to work in different spaces. We're also looking at translation devices, and we have a number of Spanish and French speaking associates at our different locations. And we're actually one location. We're started using a tool called Pocket Talk. It actually looks a lot like your iPhone, and it's a translation system that the supervisors can carry and translate right back and forth with the associates. It's been extremely successful. We have one plant in particular that has both, the majority of the supervisors and managers speak English as their only language. We have many Spanish and French-speaking manufacturing workers, and that tool has been fabulous in terms of being able to kind of bridge across the three languages. And we've also dedicated marketing support to our production labor area as well. And you can see some samples of this on the right of customizable brochures, flyers, street banners, cards, etc., and then mirroring these items on different social media channels as well. So as we put a big hiring push in a certain area, we can kind of combine some of the traditional marketing elements with social media postings, etc., and different outreach methods to try to gain momentum and bring attention to certain locations as we hire in that space. So some of these are traditional, but we're trying to blend all of these different tools in different spaces to help put ourselves in the most competitive position possible. A second item that we're doing, and this is I think has been be very helpful to us. It's something new. Is when you think from an HR standpoint, our traditional compensation benchmarking, you fill out salary surveys with the benchmarking companies every year, and then 6 or 8 months later, you get your salary survey data and you kind of see where you're at and how the market's moved over the last year. But that's generally, a 6 months to a year data that's aged and old. And the way that the rates are moving right now, we just can't wait that long to see where we're at relative to the market. And so what we've been doing is going out online and scanning different job boards and pulling jobs for technicians and machine operators that are within about a 25-mile radius of our plants. And we find that about 25 miles is about the limit of what we're getting people to commute to our locations from. So we need to recruit within that diameter. And so what we're doing is we're once a month pulling operator jobs and technician jobs around all of our locations, and then we're plotting those wages, the starting wage, the average wage, and the maximum wage that are being advertised for those jobs, and we're plotting those out, and then we're overlaying, like in this example on the left here on the screen, the blue lines represent the pay range for a similar Milliken job, so we can kind of see what the market is offering and where we're at. And this is a little bit different. We're not necessarily just benchmarking textile companies, because that's more of a financial competitiveness benchmarking. What we're trying to do is actually benchmark from a candidate standpoint. What are they seeing? So if somebody's sitting at home and they're on their mobile device and they're scanning through a internet job board and they're seeing the different hourly wages that are posted. What are they seeing? What are they looking for? What are they experiencing as the market wages? That's helping us see where we're at. And then each month we'll do another scan and we'll see has sort of the pattern of the dots here effectively and the averages, have they started to move over time? And that's an early warning indicator for us that we may be starting to fall behind the wage market in a certain area. And it's something that we can then share with our manufacturing leadership and our finance folks to say, if we're really struggling in hiring a certain area or retention, part of our response may be the wage response or wage changes, and this gives us a faster early warning system to see how things are moving in areas, and we need to make a proactive adjustment versus waiting a whole nother year to the next merit cycle. So we've done this for several months. It's been helpful. We have identified already a few places where we see material movements in the market, and we're going to continue to do this. And I think it'll help us be more, I won't say proactive, but we can at least sort of be closer to real time in the wage situation and the wage inflation versus being 6 months or a year behind the curve. The other piece that we're putting a big focus in on is the employee experience and something called our team initiative. And this is really focused on the retention side of the equation. So the wages and the marketing and the recruiting are more on obviously the recruiting side of it, bringing people in. The key piece then is around how do you create an environment where people want to stay. And our team initiative stands for Together We Empower Associates in Manufacturing. And there are 6 elements to it. And these are all based on a lot of research, a lot of org health surveys, interviews, focus groups, et cetera, about what are those things that will really make a difference to help create the right environment for our associates. And so briefly, the 6 elements are: number 1 is improving onboarding, the first impressions of the company and how people build a network, feel connected to the company, get good training on their job, and they're welcomed into the company makes a huge difference. We see in many cases and for many companies, onboarding is a very fast, quick, how fast can we get the person onto the floor? And you may miss an opportunity to really build a relationship and an understanding with that new employee that will help them stay on over the long term. Our internal data and data from other external resources we've looked at says that most of that production employee turnover is happening in the first year, and we think the onboarding can make a difference. The second one is actually building a career center at a plant. And so, one of the challenges is in a manufacturing environment, a lot of these folks are deskless workers. They don't have, direct access to the company job boards or information, et cetera. And we're trying to sort of create the experience. You think about your college or university where they had a career center to help you get internships and explore careers and interview and things like that. We're trying to do a flavor of that where we have a physical space dedicated to this that will show the jobs available at the plants, the training available, how do you advance your career, additional skill supports. We're even going to show some of the information about wage hierarchies and how you can, if you get additional training and additional skills, you can move up financially. So we really want to demonstrate that to folks that they have opportunities to advance and make that very clear and easily accessible. We're also doing a lot around management soft skill training, and a lot of the external research says that the number one factor in organizational health is the relationship between a manager and the employee. And how does a manager and their day-to-day work and interactions build a strong team environment and a connection with their associates on the production shift? So we're doing quite a bit of work around that. Then we have something called Aspire to Management. And for our high-performing hourly workers in production, an internal development program that could set them up to potentially go into a management role, salaried management role at that plant over time. These are folks that maybe don't have a degree, but they've really demonstrated the skills and the interest and the leadership to take additional career steps. So we put a program in place to support them. I mentioned the recruiting work as well, advancing that, and then a lot more recognition. And I think that, and probably for all of us, we spend 95% of our time focused on the problems and the issues that we have to fix. And we need to make sure we're balancing that with recognizing individuals and teams and plants for some of their accomplishments. And that's especially important in these times. So we're trying to package the recruiting improvements and competitiveness with the wage engagement and analysis, along with the organizational health environment. And we believe over time, these three things working together will elevate our effectiveness and competitiveness in building and retaining our workforce in this environment. And then something I'll share here is just going a little bit deeper on the importance of the manager-employee relationship. And our internal surveys, interviews, research, and a lot of external research from many sources again indicate that engagement, retention, organizational health is 70% based on that employee-manager relationship and experience. And some of the things that we're stressing with our group of supervisors and managers is the importance of weekly management interaction. Stopping, saying hello, listening, how are you doing? What are you working on? What do you need help with? That having that direct connection versus, sometimes as we're focused on problems, we'll have managers and just go right down the hall and focus on a machine or an issue or whatever. And then they miss out the people part. But making sure that those managers at least once a week make a direct one-on-one connection with those employees. We also hear a lot of research on the importance of managers and supervisors that listen and listen to what the problems are, listen to the ideas of the production associates and explain what's happening and have that two-way dialogue. Also, the importance of those managers understanding the jobs and the challenges that those folks face. I mentioned recognition, and then also be able to communicate about the plant and the company. We can get really focused on just communicating the minimal amount of data needed to perform a certain job, but people feel more included, more connected, and a little more passionate about the company when they learn more about what their plant is doing and how it supports the larger company and its purpose and its products and things like that. In our case, we have a plant that will do basic, put together basic textiles, and then that'll ship to another plant, which will actually then construct airbags for cars. And we want folks to know at all those locations and all parts of that operational team that the work they're doing is helping contribute to save a lot of lives, with those car safety items. And so helping to make sure people know what they're a part of. Also, that feeling of team and feeling connected with the group. I mentioned new hire support. So, that for our managers and supervisors, asking them to lean in deeper when we have a new hire to give them that extra attention, and then ensuring that you can share as a manager, you can talk about what are potential career paths and development and training items that are available at that plant. So this is sort of our homework list, expectation list, and sort of the communication, interaction, engagement that a manager should be having with their associates as much as possible. So with that, I will pause there and welcome to take, I know we have a couple of questions teed up and questions from the audience, and happy to take those.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Craig, for the fascinating opening keynote. Some really interesting advice, and sort of tips I think that we could all take away regarding this, the Great Resignation, how we can overcome that. You're right, absolutely right. We've got a couple questions that I've got here just to kick us off, really, and just to delve a little bit deeper, really, into some of those themes. The first one, really, that I just, more general approach, but this Great Resignation, we know it's not unique to manufacturing. We know so many different sectors, or all sectors are affected by it. But why, perhaps, in your opinion, do you think manufacturing has borne the brunt, as it were, and perhaps suffered in this sense more than other sectors?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors, but I'll share one in particular is we talk about, we've read a lot about the deskless workforce, and where you have employees that have regular access to their computers, their videos, they're connecting. They've been able to stay more connected throughout the pandemic, and they get more information about the company more easily to go through training, through recognition. Where you have that deskless workforce, all of those items are much more difficult, and so you get the engagement, commitment levels tend to be much lower in those spaces. And so I think we start with sort of a digital divide that sort of creates it creates an extra challenge there. And then I think also what we're seeing is that associates are wanting and needing more flexibility, and that's not traditionally been something that we do in a manufacturing environment, from shift schedules and things like that. In fact, it's been really opposite. And so what we're seeing is that more and more as companies are providing some of that flexibility and support, that they seem to be performing better in this situation. So I think those are two of probably many factors that are part of that. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'd be interested to know, to what extent at Milliken and even, in your role, were you seeing these trends pre-pandemic? Did they register at all when employees were being onboarded or new recruits were coming through the door? Were they asking for those sorts of policies, flexible working or anything like that at all, or is this purely a post-pandemic trend that we're seeing?
I think we were seeing hints of it in the a year to 2 years before the pandemic. And I think fundamentally in the U.S. our labor participation rate has been dropping and dropping and dropping, and so we saw that in the 2018-19 timeframe when unemployment was very low. We were starting to see early signs of these things and some of the demands coming in. So I think the pandemic just frankly turbocharged some of these trends that were probably going to happen over 5 to 7 to 10 years. Frankly, they came in 2 years. So
yeah, accelerated what you were already seeing, as you said.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, you talked, a little bit about wages. Well, quite a bit about wages, in fact. I mean, to put it bluntly, do you think the manufacturing industry is paying enough to attract skilled workers? Is that something industry-wide perhaps needs to be looked at in relation to what other industries will now pay for a skilled worker?
Yeah, in that space. Good. Well, I think everybody on the call probably has their own financial calculations to make and their own markets of what the reality is. I think the challenge is just that inflation rate. Even as we're making, let's say traditionally 3% wage increases each year, kind of what we've been doing, most of us have been doing for the last 5 or 10 years. That's not even close enough to even keep up with the cost of living. And so I think in the last 6 months to a year, I've heard more comments about cost of living, prices, gas costs, et cetera. The sensitivity in our employees, for all of us probably, of those factors has just gone way up, and it's more top of mind. So I think that these employees are always wage sensitive, but I think that sensitivity level has gone up even more. And then I won't use any specific company names, but let's say a well-known company with a gigantic warehouse distribution system moves into your area, you can see that some of those higher paying companies will reset the entire wage level for the entire region in that area. I've read some articles as much as 10%. So you have this inflation situation, you have more sensitivity, and then you have certain employers that are almost sort of setting the pace for the rest of us. Makes sense?
Yeah.
That we've got to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we may well have a question from our audience, if that's correct. Audience Q&A. Here we go. There it is. Hi. I believe I do recognise you from day one. Please remind us and our audience who you are, who you work for, and of course your question for Craig. Oh, you might still be on mute. I think.
Connection up now.
There we are. We can hear you. So sorry. Yeah, please just introduce yourself.
For some reason, my regular audio doesn't work with Zoom.
It's one of those. Well, welcome. We can see you. We can hear you. It's lovely to have you on our stage. So yeah, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and direct your question for Craig.
Hi, Craig. And hi, everyone. My name is Ann Hausman. I work for Merck in the external manufacturing space, but I've had many years on the internal manufacturing shop floor. So I can relate to pretty much everything that you've said. And I completely agree with, we saw, the resignation from the shop floors, I'll call it, even before the pandemic. It's very difficult to hire people that can work 24/7, in a fast-paced environment and that are skilled. My question is that, we've also tried to do a lot of the things that you have shared with us today, and some have gone successfully, some not. I think, sometimes some of our leaders want to do well, but Merck is a really huge company. And my question to you is, how have you been able to change the culture at the top to allow your company to experiment with some of these things that you decided to do? How did you make it available for people to lean into discomfort, opportunity to challenge the status quo at different levels? And then I guess along with that, was this change was it driven from the top, or was it bottom up? And, any suggestions you might have for a company that is trying to do that and we're we're there, but we're kind of slow at it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's a great question, and it definitely took a lot of sort of organizational influencing and steering. And I'll share what we did is we were hearing sort of from the bottom up of sort of bottoms up in the organization, the plants, just that constant concern of labor shortages, issues, things like that, and hearing the stories and seeing the numbers and operations about the impact of that. But then also feeling, I think we're also kind of hearing from the plants that they feel sort of boxed in about this is the way we do things and the way we traditionally do things, and we're kind of locked into this. And so in terms of influencing leadership, we tried to take an extremely data-driven approach, financial approach to telling the story. And so we looked at, I'll give an example. We calculated the cost of a typical temp resource that would come into our company and then convert to a full-time person. And we calculated the time, the training time, the benefits costs or the benefit savings, and then also the turnover rates of those employees. We basically mapped out, frankly, how expensive it was to have using temp resources because they turn over so much more quickly than a full-time hire is. So we did that. We did a number of things around the cost of turnover, of the incremental effect of some wage increases, what we thought that could do. And we also told a number of stories, and we sort of mixed the quantitative data with stories about what are we hearing and seeing on the floor and the front line. I'll give you an example. We would have a job fair, and I asked the recruiters and the folks at the job fair, write down what are the signals that people are, why are they attracted to Milliken, and what's pushing them away? Why are they walking away from the table? And sharing sort of those real life stories along with the data was really important. And we heard, one of the things that we heard a lot about was rotating shifts. If you have rotating shifts, people just turned around and walked away and left the recruiting table. So we put together, frankly, a lot of data, internal data, and a lot of financials that could speak to the finance community. We put in operational data that talked about the impact it had on the existing workforce and the plan around turnover and training and how it was impacting them. And we put some market data in about why people were coming and why they were leaving the company, and mixed that all together. And then, frankly, it was a lot of one-on-ones, small groups, and then pulling together larger groups of our manufacturing leaders and plant leaders to talk about these issues, all the way up to our CEO. And so it was, frankly, months of kind of that sort of groundwork to kind of build up the focus on this. And now that we're moving and we sort of aligned our senior team to fix this, we're now going out and we have our teams going out to every plant and sitting down and talking locally with the plant manager, the HR managers about their specific talent environment. What are they seeing? What do they need? What are those challenges within that 25-mile radius? So we sort of took the data all the way up, and now we're sort of taking it back down through the organization and trying to personalize it to each one of them in that space. But it was a number of months to sort of turn the ship in a new direction. But I'd say the fundamental piece was a lot of quantitative and qualitative data, a lot of storytelling.
Oh, thanks. We'll keep going on our part. Sounds like it takes a while, and thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for our audience member for coming up and asking a question, for Craig as well. That is all we have time for in our session this morning. But Craig, a wonderful opening keynote, really setting the tone for the final day of our summit. So thank you very much for that. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you in some capacity in the remainder of the time we have together.
Me too. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the day, and thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Craig.